So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Today's Torah portion is Chukat. Chukat. Chukat means, anybody know what Chukat means? And can everybody see everybody clearly?
Nope, there's a wall. Diane,
Okay.
come back.
I'm sorry.
So Chukat, can you see me clearly, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So Chukat means decree. And in this week's Torah portion, we're going to read about a very enigmatic decree. Now, you know that there's three categories of mitzvos in the Torah: Chukat, Mishpatim, and Eidos. Chukat are decrees that we don't understand. God did not give us a reason for it, the meaning behind it. Mishpatim are logical mitzvahs. Don't kill, don't steal, don't kidnap. And Eidos are mitzvahs that are a testimony to something that happened in our history. For example, we celebrate the holiday of Sukkot because when we left Egypt, there was a cloud of glory that surrounded us. So we sit in a sukkah. Passover, we eat matzah, we eat maror, we eat karoses. These are mitzvahs of a testimony, eidos to what happened when God took us out of Egypt. So 3 categories of mitzvahs. Chukas means decree. In a few minutes, we're going to go into understanding a little bit more about this. But first, I want to share something that is an underlying foundation of every single one of our classes. That when we study the Torah portion, we read about the mitzvahs, we learn about history, and we learn what happened to the people. History repeats itself, but there's a very, very important thing that really is the goal of this class and the goal of Torah, which comes from the word hora'ah, lesson. That when we study Torah, there has to be a lesson, a change in our lives from this Torah that we studied. Hora'ah, lesson. It has to be applicable to 2021, the year 2021. And the reason I'm bringing this up again this morning is, first of all, to reinforce kind of the mission statement of our class, but also because today, as we'll soon discuss, is one of the most interesting psychological insights into life and healing. So a reminder that hora'ah, Torah, from the word hora'ah, teachings, lessons in life, things from the stories, from the tales, we take out things that can and will impact our lives in this present day age. So yes, it's beautiful to read the mitzvahs and reinforce our connection to God, which is the whole purpose. And all this through understanding, what does this have to do with me? Because if it's in the Torah, it has to do with you and me. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. Which now wanted to tell you that I started to upload all the classes to YouTube under Freida Hecht. The videos are not great yet because I don't have such good video quality. We're working on it. Somebody's helping me create a better way of videoing the classes. So bear with the videos, but the content is if you want to hear some of the classes from the past year and a half, you can go on YouTube, look for Freida Hecht, and it's all there, and you'll see yourselves in some of those classes as well, because you're there as well. So you're famous now. And you could also post comments if you like, but make sure they're good comments, Okay. So a Russian Jew arrives in the land of Israel. Finally, he's out from under the communist Stalin regime, the KGB, and a reporter is there to interview these new Russian immigrants. He stops the fellow. He said, "So tell me, how is your life in Russia?" He says, "I'm not complaining." "So how is your business in Russia? Your job in Russia?" "I'm not complaining." "So how is it to practice your religion, Judaism in Russia?" "I'm not complaining." What about getting food, products, clothing, medicines? I'm not complaining. The reporter is very frustrated. He says to the guy, so why did you come to Israel? He says, because here I can complain. In Russia, I'm not complaining because I'll be put into prison. Here I can complain. So in this week's Torah portion, we're going to hear once again about how the Jews complain. The past few weeks, there's been a lot of complaints. There's been a lot of rebellions. There's been a lot of stress, if you understand, in the community of a few million Jews traveling from Egypt to Israel, to the land of Israel. Now they're spending another 40 years, right? And they were coming to the end of those 40 years because the Meraglim went to spy out the land. We're almost there. A new generation is now out and about. Remember, all those who participated in the sin of the golden calf, in the sin of the spies have now passed on. So you have a new generation of Jewish men. Most of the women did not die out. They were still alive. The men, women and children who are now going to enter into Eretz Yisrael, into the Holy Land. And I'm going to start off with a story that happens where poisonous snakes are attacking the Jewish people. Poisonous snakes. They don't know what to do. So they come to Moshe. So Moshe says to God, what should we do about the current situation that there are poisonous snakes attacking? So God says to Moshe something very fascinating. Take a pole, fashion a snake, and put that snake, which is fashioned out of a material, it could be wood, gold, silver, bronze, copper, and put it on top of this giant tall pole. Think of it as a traffic light. And when the Jew who is bitten will gaze on this snake, they will be healed. Now, who here knows the symbol of the healing medical profession?
Two snakes
wrapped around
a pole.
Now you know the source of it from the Torah. Now I have a bunch of questions to ask you. And maybe you want to ask me some questions. What is strange about this story? What is strange about the story? What did we discuss about idolatry?
Okay, right. Why make a symbol out of something?
Why can't they just daven, take out a siddur, take out a book of Psalms, even though they didn't have that yet? Give a little prayer. God, I'm bitten by a snake, help. As a matter of fact, the plot thickens because as the generations progressed and entered into the land of Israel, over the years, they forgot that this was a symbol of healing through God. They began to worship this snake on the pole as idolatry, as a god. And this became a very big problem. So King Cheskia in the 16th century BCE took this pole and snake and destroyed it because of what happened. The Jews were using it as a god. So he destroyed this very valuable, what do you want, artifact or gift from Moshe. So it's a very, very sad thing. He had to destroy it. So why would God make something that in the future could be looked upon as idolatry? And also, why put it on a pole? And why a snake? The same thing that bit you heals you. Why not a bird, a comforting picture of a dove, something like that looks healing like? I don't know, what's another symbol of healing? A rose, a flower. Not only that, interesting tidbit, Moshe fashions the snake out of copper because copper is nechoshes, snake is nachash. So even the material Moshe uses alludes to a snake. Oh, you want to go be healed? Go to the nechoshes, nachash, the snake made out of copper, which is from the same root word. So this goes back to what I introed at the beginning of our class, that herein lies a very powerful psychological insight in how to deal with poisonous snakes in our lives. Poisonous snakes in our lives. How many of us have been poisoned in a horrible relationship, backstabbed, abused, demoralized, people who are deceptive, manipulative? We're bitten by venomous snakes all the time. People come and they stab you in the back. They bite you. They hurt you. It happens continuously to us. In here lies and how to deal with the poisonous snakes in our lives. Whether it happens to you once in your lifetime, which is more than enough, or it happens to you continuously. People sometimes have continuous, backstabbing and poisoning and being bitten and crushed and manipulated. So if you remember, I don't know if you ever read, there was an Austrian British philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who lived from 1889 to 1951. He was one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. And I read about this, it's so interesting. He said something, what was your philosophy about? To show a fly out of the fly bottle. What is that? He took a bottle and he put a fly into the bottle. The bottle had an opening, a bottle. Now the fly tries to get out of the bottle. The fly flies to the right, the fly flies to the left, bangs its head back and forth, falls down, tries again. And this goes on, unfortunately, for days until the fly perishes in the bottle. What's the one thing the fly doesn't do? Wittgenstein writes, it doesn't look up. All the fly had to do was look up and fly out of the jar, but the fly doesn't, because the fly mentality is to go back and forth, bang its head, and finally it is so demoralized, it falls down and perishes. This is the psychological insight of the snake on the pole. God teaches us two things. You're poisoned, you're hurt, you're betrayed, you're backstabbed. First of all, don't run away. Confront the snake. Look at it. Look at the copper snake. Confront it, but confront it and look at it from a standpoint above. Now, don't go back down where the snake is, go above them. That's why it's on a pole. Look on the high. Look at it from a vantage point of strength, not as a victim, but as someone who has been challenged, bitten, and now you have to know how to get out of this. How? By looking at it from a higher vantage point. Sometimes you look at something from a different perspective, from a higher perspective, you're able to deal with it. Like I always say, don't get down and dirty with somebody. You want to be in the mud, don't get down with them. They could stay there. You look at them from a vantage point of strength, of height. You get bitten, don't go back down. Rise up above it so you can deal with it in a much more positive way that will not only heal you, but make you better and more powerful and stronger. This is the story that we read, by the way, with Jacob wrestling with the angel. Remember the story with Jacob wrestling with the angel? Remember let's go back in time a little bit. So Jacob, one of our patriarchs, father of the 12 tribes, now leaves and goes traveling back with his entire family back to the land of Israel. He leaves his father-in-law, and now he's traveling back to the land of Israel. He's going to encounter his brother Esau. Remember, Esau wants to kill him, and he crosses over the Yabak River to go back to the land of Israel. He's about to meet up with his brother Esau, praying, preparing, what's going to happen? Will Esau try to kill him? Will Esau make peace with him, etc.? He realizes he left some stuff over the river, and he goes back, jars, and he goes back to get them, and man attacks him. We know that it's the host angel of Esau, the Kabbalah tells us, and there's a wrestling match the entire night. The man dislocates Jacob's hip, his sciatica, so he's wounded. But as the sun begins to rise, Jacob holds on to him. He doesn't let go of him. So the angel, the man was really an angel, says, let go of me. I have to go away. I have to return. So Jacob says, no, I will not let go of you till you bless me. And the commentary says, what? Imagine you're walking down a dark alleyway. An assailant attacks you, beats you up, dislocates your hip. You're in pain, you're injured. You grab onto your assailant. You don't call 911. You don't punch him in the face. You say, I'm not letting go of you till you bless me. What kind of story is this? Why didn't Yaakov punch him out? The answer is because exactly this with the pole. What God is telling you is when you meet your assailant, by the way, we're not talking about a physical assailant here, because yes, fight back, please. Don't let anyone beat you up. We're talking about a psychological assailant, emotional assailant. Bless me. See the blessing of why this happened to you. It made you stronger. It made you better. It made you smarter. It made you more powerful, more able to meet other challenges. In every poisonous snake, there is a blessing. This is what the snake on the pole is telling us. Look up at that thing that bit you and see, first of all, how you could heal. Look at it from a vantage point of height. Look at it objectively, so to speak, and also see why what this happened to you. How does it bring you? Can it bring you a blessing, inner strength, more power to deal with life's challenges? Because if it happened to you, God meant it to happen to you. So now see why. What can you get out of it? What's the lesson in your life? And by the way, just to clarify, when God told the Jewish people, you look at this and you'll be healed, they didn't just look at it. You had to look at it and think to yourself, Almighty God is healing me. Healing me. It's really God healing me, not the snake on the pole. The snake on the pole was just teaching us how to deal with the poison, deal with the challenges, deal with the backstabbing in our lives. But really, it's God healing us. When the Jewish people forgot, King Cheskio had to destroy it. When they forgot that it wasn't the copper snake that was healing, when they forgot that it was God healing, that's when it had to be destroyed. It could no longer be a vehicle of healing. It defied the purpose. So when looking at the snake, they had to pray, God, I'm looking up at this snake. Heal me, please. You understand how it worked? So it wasn't magic where they looked at it and they got healed. They had to be conscientious. They had to pray to God to heal them from the poison. So to reiterate, we have to always look up. When something happens to you, look up. Look at it from a different view, a different vantage point, and then you can deal with it and you can heal from it and get back from that. Otherwise, you're down with the snake. You'll get bit again, trust me. Snakes bite. You know what they say, a zebra doesn't change its stripes. A snake doesn't change its venom. This is what the story is teaching us. How to deal with venom. Which means it exists, because if the Torah is telling us how to deal with it, means that it exists in this world. Does anybody want to add, comment, complain? Here you could complain. Remember, we're not in the USSR. So should we move on to the next topic of the day? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about the Torah actual portion, which again has something so unbelievable. I was reading up and I was like, wow. So Chukat, we said again, are decrees. God gives us decrees. Anybody know any mitzvahs that are called Chukat in the Torah? And there's one very famous one in this Torah portion. So kosher is an example of a decree. No one in their right mind would think of separating milk and meat. No one in their right mind would know how to ritually slaughter an animal if we didn't have the Torah telling us. It's not something you do on your own. That's an example of a chok from God. Another one is mikvah, going to the mikvah, ritual purity. After a menstrual cycle, you count 7 clean days and then you immerse in the mikvah and then you're intimate with your spouse. Another chok. No one in their right mind would come up with this idea. But there's a very interesting insight from Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, that the way you do a decree because God said so, not because it's logical, is the same way you have to do all the mitzvahs. Even the ones that are logical, you have to do like they're illogical, or rather you do it because of your faith in God. For example, do not steal, do not kill, do not kidnap, setting up courts of law. To us, it's very logical because we live in a civilized society, what we call a civilized society under the Constitution. But even those mitzvahs, we do because God said so, not because the human intellect thinks it's a good idea. Because guess what? Who created logic to be logical? God. Why is 1 + 1 2? Why isn't 1 + 1 3? Logic was also created by God. Otherwise, it would be illogical, which is also created by God. The illogical is also a creation. So when you have a society like the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, who decide that you can kill because one race is superior to the other, so you can wipe out the other race, then they decided killing was logical. So when society decides one day that it's okay to kill the elderly because they cannot contribute to society anymore, like euthanasia, many tribes practiced, many nations practiced euthanasia in the olden times, the Torah steps in and says, you think that's logical. We don't do it because the Torah says not to kill, not because you think it's logical or illogical, not because society has moved the parameters or the boundaries of what is civilization or civilized living. So when society decides that something is okay when it's not okay, that it's okay to steal because, listen, every man has to be for themselves. It's apocalypse now, each man for their own. We have to survive. You have to, Torah comes and tells us what is permissible, what is not permissible, whether we think it's logical or not. So this, to sum up, is telling us that even when it's not a decree, even in our minds, it's a very logical thing not to kill, not to steal, not to kidnap, to set up courts of law, to be humane, to be charitable, to be kind, to share. Even those mitzvahs, we do it not only because we like it, it makes us feel good, it's part of how society operates, but because the Torah says so. And that way, you could never stray from what is truly moral and ethical, because when society one day decides something is okay, you go to the Torah, this is not okay. That is the book that eternally and forever will tell us what is right and what is wrong, what we should do and what we shouldn't do, irregardless of what government, society, leadership tells us.
Are there exceptions, like, for example, somebody that's poor and has no food and it takes an apple off of a street vendor? Is that still, I'm trying to say?
Yeah, look of Les Miserables and
Right.
Jean Valjean.
Right.
Jean Valjean. Why should he have had to steal those candlesticks and be pursued by that Inspector Javert? I know all this. I did all my book reports. I love Les Miserables. I went to the theater. So don't think I'm so educated. It just was one of my favorite novels. But listen, when society betrays its people,
Right.
putting you into debtor's prison and you have no way out, it's called pekuach nefesh. Take the apple off the tree, yes, Carrie. Take the loaf of bread and feed your family. Do not let them starve to death. because of a cruel, uncivilized society. It is precisely a society like that that causes you to have to steal a loaf of bread.
Right.
So it's like when, the Nazis put people to death if they took extra food or shared.
Right.
So should you have not shared your food because the terrible Nazis, insane people, crazy, corrupt society decided you can't share your food? So of course, it's called pikuach nefesh, for life. You desecrate Shabbos. If you need to save a life, you don't say, well, Shabbos, you're not allowed to drive. Shabbos, you're not allowed to use the phone to call the ambulance. There you're transgressing if you don't. So remember, Torah was created for humanity, for people, for this world. So in there are always the loopholes, all the exceptions to the rule. That's why you have rabbis who tell you, how to do things if you have to. When the Torah says, it's not always an open and shut case. You need to discuss, you need to analyze. Not in life and death, you go for life. Okay. So there's a very enigmatic mitzvah, decree, known as, it involves a red heifer. Who knows what a red heifer is? The red heifer was, go ahead, Margaret. You unmute.
Yeah, a heifer.
Go ahead.
It's a cow.
Exactly, a red cow. Whoever saw a red cow, anybody? Yeah. So this, I'm now going to share an interesting tidbit. So I read an interesting insight. There were 10 red heifers created in the universe at the 6 days of creation. All 9 of them were used during the time of the holy temples, and 1 was hidden away till Mashiach comes, when we're going to need it for the Beit HaMikdash once again. So now a red heifer, how is it used in the temple? A person would come in contact with a corpse, a dead body, somebody passed away, and now that person was considered impure, which means they couldn't go into the Beit HaMikdash. They were not permitted. So how do you get purity? Remember, the laws of purity are a decree by God. And this doesn't apply now. We don't have a Beit HaMikdash. You go to the Kohen, to the priest. He takes the red heifer, which has been brought as an offering, and now there's ashes because it's been barbecued. I don't like to use the word sacrifice, if you notice, because people misunderstand what it means. I always say it's an offering, a barbecue. Because one lady said to me, Freida, they sacrificed animals in the temple? Is that humane? It sounds so gory. I said, really? As gory as your grill on Sunday afternoons? That's exactly what it is. They took an animal, was ritually slaughtered, and they brought it in the bar as a barbecue. They made a barbecue. And okay, so they take the red heifer. And by the way, a meat was given to the Kohanim to take home. That was their reward for working in the Beis HaMikdash. They got free meat from the barbecue, from the offerings. So they took the ashes from the red heifer, the Kohen, mixed it with fresh spring water, sprinkled it on the person who was impure on day 2, on day 7, and then that person became ritually pure. And guess what? The Kohen who did the sprinkling became impure. Very enigmatic, very strange, very weird. We'll talk about that in a minute. That was the mitzvah of the red heifer.
Is that why when you go to a cemetery, you have to wash your hands when you leave?
Exactly. Whenever you go to a, God forbid, a funeral, or you come in contact with a dead body, if you, God forbid, when you leave the presence of the funeral, and you right before you do it outside, you don't do it in the house, you wash your hands. I was at a funeral, I had my kids bring me out water to the front of the house because it's better to wash your hands outside.
Yep.
That do a ritual washing 6 times. Yes. That's also all the morning when you wake up, before you get out of bed, people have a basin and they wash because you're reborn every morning. Or if you don't have a basin, you do it by the kitchen sink. After you use the lavatory, you wash your hands. Before you eat bread, you wash your hands. These are all part of the ritual washing. I had Shabbos guests. I said, come, we're going to wash our hands for the challah. So one of my guests said, but my hands aren't dirty. I said, that's exact. It's not, it's a ritual washing. As a matter of fact, if your hands are dirty, you have to first wash it off dry and then do the ritual washing. So, and that's why you take off your rings, because you want the water to touch your whole hand. So this was the mitzvah of the red heifer, a very strange, perplexing mitzvah, because the guy who gets sprinkled, the guy or the gal gets pure. Now the Kohen who does the sprinkling is impure. Doesn't make sense. Now the Kohen has to go get purity. We'll get back to that in a minute. Another interesting story. So there was a fellow Doma. He was a non-Jewish fellow, lived in Ashkelon in the land of Israel. And during the first temple, the first Beit HaMikdash, one of the stones of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, they had that, it was called the Choshen Mishpat. 12 stones, every tribe had a different color stone. And when they would ask God questions, the stone would light up, and that's how they had the answer. Like a magical before technology. One of the stones got lost or broken. So they knew that there was a guy, Doma, who was a gem merchant, him and his father. So one of the Kohanim went there, or representatives went to buy a gem to replace. And he said, sure, and he gives them the price. And when he goes to get the gem, he realizes that it's in the room where his father is napping. So he goes back, he says to the people, I can't give you the stone now. We'll pay you double. He says, no, you don't understand. My father is sleeping in that room. We'll pay you double. No, I cannot get you the stone now. I can't disturb my father. When they came back later to get it and they offered to pay him double, he only took the original amount. And God called out and said, because he was so respectful of his father, honoring your mother and father, he's going to be rewarded. How was he rewarded? On his farm was born a red heifer from his flock. And when the people in the Beit HaMikdash, the Jews in the Beit HaMikdash, needed to buy a red heifer, they knew he had one. And they paid him a very large sum of money and became wealthy from that, because it was a very difficult thing to obtain. You didn't have red cows growing up. They had to be born red. You couldn't contrive one. You couldn't now they do genetic DNA manipulation. There was no DNA in manipulation. So to get a red heifer was a very special thing. So God rewarded this fellow Doma. Interesting insight, isn't it? I actually read there was a red heifer born somewhere in Israel. I don't know. Anyway, means Mashiach is coming. So now there's a very perplexing, enigmatic story in the Medrash I want to share with you. God says to Moshe the laws of purity. He says, Moshe, when a Jewish person comes in contact with a dead body, they become impure. He tells Moshe, God is teaching Moshe this mitzvah. So Moshe waits and says to God, but how do you obtain purity? You're telling me that if you come in contact with a corpse, with a dead body, you become impure. Now, tell me, how do you become pure? Because in all the other times when God spoke about purity and impurity, God right away finished the sentence. You come in contact with a weasel, you come in contact with a dead animal, a certain dead animal, you become impure. And now you go to the Beis HaMikdash and you do A, B, and C, and you're pure. When God tells Moshe the mitzvah of the fact that you come in contact with a dead body, you're now impure, God doesn't say anything. So Moshe says, so God, how do you obtain purity? And the Medrash says, God is silent. God doesn't answer. So Moshe turns green in his face, which means green, like, green, like with pain, angst. This is the end of the story. And a little while later, God comes back to Moshe and says, the way to obtain purity from exposure to a dead body is you take a red heifer, you mix the ashes of the cooked, grilled red heifer with fresh spring water, and you sprinkle it on the Jewish person, the Kohen sprinkles it, and then the person obtains purity. This is the story. What's going on here? What is the story? Moshe didn't turn green. Other times God told him rules and regulations that are much more complicated and much more. What's going on? What is the story really about? Anybody know? What is this conversation happening between Moshe and God? What's happening again? Does anybody want to offer their explanation? Very interesting thing. God tells Moshe, you know, when you encounter death, you become impure. When you encounter death, God tells Moshe, you're going to encounter tremendous pain, loss. Impurity means a hole in your heart. Spiritual impurity also has a physical counterpart. You know why you're impure? Because physically you feel the pain. So Moshe says to God, is there no coming back from loss? Is there no purity? Is there no coming back from the pain of loss? And God is silent. So Moshe turns green. Because what is God telling him? No, I have no answer for you, Moshe. If God doesn't have an answer to death, what hope is there for us, humanity, who experiences death in our lives? Moshe is so upset. He's filled with angst. He turns green. He's feeling tremendous sorrow because God is basically telling him, no, there's no way to come back. Then God comes back later in the story. And he says, take the ashes, mix it with the fresh spring water, and that's how you will obtain purity. In other words, God is saying to Moshe, you don't really come back ever from loss of death. You never really recover from someone passing on in your life. But there's some consolation, there's some purity. What's the consolation? That ash, which is symbolic of death, is mixed with fresh spring water, which is symbolic of life. The baby comes out of a womb surrounded with water. Water is rejuvenation. It quenches your thirst. It invigorates. You come out of the shower, you feel great. You go for a swim, you feel wonderful. Water symbolizes life. Ash symbolizes the opposite of life. So God is telling Moshe, there is ash. That's the way I created this universe. But there's also life. Dar hailech v'dar bai. The generation dies out, but a new generation is born. New life comes. So Moshe cries out and he says, why, God? And God says, because I am God. This is my decree. In other words, why altogether do you need that? Why? And God said, this is a decree. And King Solomon writes, King Solomon was known as to be the wisest of all men, writes, this I could never understand. The red heifer, this concept, I could not ever comprehend. It's incomprehensible. But there is a consolation at the end of the day that there is always life that will come. I have a friend who lost her mother when she was 6 years old. And till this day, she's in her 50s. She tells me she has not recovered. That's what it's talking about. That's why Moshe turns green. There is really no true healing, God says. However, there is hope. There is comfort.
So do we not believe then in an afterlife?
Oh, yes. Believe in the resurrection.
And the reason I'm saying this is because my brother went to a funeral and it was a Christian funeral. And he said it was very unnerving to hear the clergy say, well, now she's in a better place. And he was saying, well, the place would have been great here.
Yeah, people like to say that.
If you're in a different choice.
Okay, so clarifying. Techiyat HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, is definitely a Jewish concept. Maimonides, Ani Mamin B'Emunah Shlema B'Vikyas HaMashiach. I believe that Mashiach will come. Maimonides has one of the. Now, resurrection is definitely happening. That's why we don't cremate. That's why we don't embalm. That's why we don't do anything to the body that's not necessary, because the body will be resurrected.
Okay.
The sacredness of the body in Jewish law is very, very powerful. That's why we don't tattoo.
Right.
You're not, one of the mitzvahs is not abusing your body. Like you can't suddenly harm yourself. Self-harm is against the Torah. So there's definitely resurrection. Now, the point here, I think, and please help me because it's up to you too, how you think, is not that there's no hope, there's no healing, but that at the end of the day, I think the Torah portion is telling us that there is a piece of you that really never is in control, because that person did die. The person did leave the world. The person was part of you, whether it's someone's child, nebuch, or someone's spouse or parent. It's there in some place. It never goes away, the pain. But do we live on? Do we keep living and giving it all we got? Or do we wallow in misery? We absolutely move on. The person would want you to move on. And the person doesn't really leave. The soul remains. That's why we have Yisker, and we have Kaddish, and we have yard sites. Maybe God should have said, don't have any remembrances. It'll help with the pain. Quite the contrary. It is these things that help us feel closer to the deceased, feel that they're still part of us. And when I was shitting Shiva for my father, my aunt said something, and at that time I didn't even listen. But now I listen, now I remember it. She says, which means you will find comfort in the naming. When children were born, they were named after my father. And that's how you find comfort also. Oh, he's just like my father, that little baby. My father's name was Gershon Daiv Ber. We say that all the little Gershons are just like my father. They just have his personality, his wisdom, his wit, his laid back personality. And and also some of his physical personality. My father sit with his mouth open a lot, like, he had a weak jaw, most probably, as we call it now. But in those days, they just, they would say, yeah, little things like that remind us of those who pass on. But that's what brings us comfort. That brings us comfort. But yes, loss is loss. And even King Solomon says, at the end of the day, I cannot understand God's decree. Why did it have to be this way? So does anybody want to add anything or say anything? So just an interesting insight before we go to one of the most momentous parts of the Torah portion is that, got my train of thought, give me a second. Let's move on. Just what I was going to say. Let's move on. Now we come to the Torah portion where Miriam, the famous Miriam, passes away. The famous Miriam passes away. Could somebody mute his on? Can somebody mute themselves? Khani. Oh yeah. Okay. So I want to read to you what happens. Miriam passes away. Now, who remembers what did the Jewish people have in the merit of Miriam? What reward did they get because of Miriam? The well of Miriam.
Water.
In other words, they literally had a traveling rock, magic rock. You think Harry Potter had magic? A magic rock that traveled with them from place to place that gave them fresh water. They never had to worry. Now Miriam passes away in the desert, Moshe's oldest sister, and you see why this is so important in the storyline, the emotional trauma that Moshe feels. And let's see what happens. So Miriam passes away. Let me open up the Chumash and read to you what happens. Vayavai b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda midbar son b'chodesh harishon vayishev ha'am b'kodesh v'tamas sham Miriam v'tikaveh Shem sham. So Miriam passes away, and she's buried in that area called Kadesh. Now there's no water. Let's see what happens. Vayarav ha'am im Moshe. The people quarreled. They complained with Moshe, and they said, if only we had died with the death of our brothers before the Lord. In other words, we're going to all die of thirst here. If only you would have let us die out with the previous generation. Why have you brought the congregation of the Lord to the desert so that we are and our livestock should die there? Why have you taken us out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's not a place for seeds, for fig trees, grapevine, pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. All right, enough of a complaint. Moshe and Aaron move away, and they go to the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, to God, and they fall on their faces. And Hashem appears. And this is what Hashem says to Moshe. Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock. Speak to the rock in their presence so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water for them from the rock and give them congregation and their livestock to drink. This wording here is very, very pivotal. Moshe takes the staff that God commanded him, and Moshe and Aaron assemble the people in front of the rock, and he says to them, now you listen, you rebels. Moshe calls them rebels. Can we draw water for you from this rock? Moshe raises his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And when an audience of water gushes forth, and their congregation and the livestock drink. Look what's going on over here. So God comes now to Moshe and Aaron, and he says, since you didn't have faith in me and sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring them to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of dispute where the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was sanctified through them. Look what happens now. Moshe is punished. God says, you didn't sanctify my name by speaking to the rock. You're not going into the land of Israel. You and not Aaron. There's so many questions here. It's mind-boggling. And there's over 100 commentaries that have different viewpoints of what actually went on here. I was writing it down. So I went to see, why was Moshe punished? What was Moshe's sin? 100 different opinions of what his sin was. Let's share some of them. Go ahead. What do you think? Why is Moshe punished now that he can't go into the land of Israel? Tell me what you think. No answer could be wrong. There's 100 opinions. You're definitely going to hit on one of them.
This is silly.
Say that again, Ayan. Sorry.
But could he have thought that, mistakenly thought that this was idolatry to talk to a rock, and he didn't have faith enough to see the difference? I don't know.
Okay, so maybe he felt talking to the rock was maybe considered idolatry. Okay. I didn't see that, but it's fine. Anybody else want to share what they think happened here? Now, before I share, let's ask some questions and let's go back. When else was there a rock story? Remember way back? There's another story. Let me read you the story. Let's go back in Exodus. The entire community of the children of Israel journeyed from the desert, and they come to Rafidim. I'm abridging it. And there was no water for the people to drink. So the people quarreled with Moshe. And they said, give us water so we may drink. So Moshe says to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Hashem? The people thirsted for water and they complained. Why did you take us out of Egypt? Why did you bring us here for our children, our livestock to die? And Moshe cried out to the Lord, what shall I do for this people? A little while longer, they will stone me. They will stone me, he writes. This is in the original story when they had no water. And Moshe, and the Lord said to Moshe, pass before the people, take some of the elders, take in your hand a staff, which you struck the Nile. Remember, they struck the Nile River and it turned blood. Remember, they used a stick. Remember, Aaron did the striking though. Behold, I shall stand there before you, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moshe did so before the eyes of the elders of Israel. Okay, look at that. We go back to the story in Shemos. God says, take a stick. What does Moshe do? He hits the rock, and what happens? Water comes out. So maybe one of the answers is, Moshe, in this Torah portion, it says, God said, take your staff and talk to the rock. Moshe might have assumed, how do you talk to a rock? You hit it. That's the way of communication. After all, look at the other story in Shemais. Moshe hit the rock and water came out. Now, if God didn't want Moshe to hit the rock with a stick this time, let's say take a different angle. Maybe that's not what God meant, talking by hitting. Then why did water come out? God should have said, you didn't talk, now you're not getting the water. You didn't ask me nicely, you're not getting dessert, right? So why does water come out? And then another question, I hope I have answers to all these questions, ladies, is let me ask you, Moshe, who sacrificed everything and anything for the people of Israel, he's not going in because he hits the rock? Like, where's the justice here? Couldn't there be a little bit of a different punishment?
But how about
leprosy? Go ahead.
In the Exodus, he hit the rock, so he already established a rapport between him and the rock and getting the water, that it's not necessary for him to then start all over again and hit the rock again. He's already done that. Now it should be that he's able to have a discussion about
With the rock.
With the rock.
Okay, very interesting, Carrie. I'm going to build on that in a second. So the commentaries literally have hundreds of answers and discussions on this. It's a very in-depth discussion. I'm going to try to share a few very important small points because it's coming to the end of our class. And I hope and I pray I do some justice to the story here. So like I said before, Moshe, when he was told take the staff, he might have assumed that God meant, how do you converse with a rock? You hit it, right? I saw another very interesting thing, that Moshe just lost not only his oldest sister, his confidant, his right-hand man, woman, man. If you look at the story of Moshe's relationship with Miriam, because this very much resonates with me, this part. Miriam saved him in the basket. Remember when he was a little baby? As a matter of fact, he was only born because of a sister who criticized her parents and saying, why aren't you having babies? You're worse than Paro. You're not bringing any children into the world. Have faith. And then Miriam by the Reed Sea, how she got the women to dance and song and had the tambourines. And how she cared about the fact that he was separated from his wife. Remember, he says, how are we going to help her? He's not with his wife. They're separated. And she got leprosy for talking about her brother, even though she meant it in good faith. She wanted to help her brother's marriage, relationship. Miriam to Moshe was not just an older sister. She was his big sister's confidant, his rock, his pillar of strength. So one of the commentaries said that Miriam passes away, and then this hits him right in the head, right? No water, and the people are like, come on already. He hits the rock because emotionally He was overcharged, even though he was Moshe, the great Moshe. Emotionally, the stress, the agony of what just happened, and now this too. So this is what happens. Moshe is, after all, a human being, even though the greatest leader. So what's going on is a lot's happening here. But then let's keep digging a little deeper, deeper, deeper. If you look at the terminology in the rock by the story of Shemot, it's called a tzur, which is a rock. In this Torah portion, it's called a sela. Allah sela, ha, ha, on the rock you hit. On the rock you hit, and water will come out. There's a Hasidic song. Hit the rock and water will come out. There it's called a tzur. Here it's called a sela. What's the difference? You know that in the Torah and the Hebrew language, every word has a numerical value, has a understanding, has under meaning. And if God uses tzur there and sela here, there's a reason. A tzur, a rock, is a rock through and through. To really get anything out of the rock, you got to really bang away with your hammer and chisel. A sela is a softer rock, which contains moisture and water within. When Moshe took the Jews out of Egypt in the earlier days, 40 years earlier, they were like a tzur. They were a people that had just been beaten, whipped for years by the slave masters. Remember, taking a slave out of Egypt didn't mean taking the slave out of the man or woman. It had to be a new transformation mentally, emotionally, psychologically. The Jews of Egypt understood whipping, hitting, severity, judgment. So there, it required a hitting of the rock. They had to see Moshe hit, and then they got the water. They were used to that type of relationship. When they came at Sinai, what happens? God lifts the mountain over their heads. He says, guys, gals, you don't want the Torah, the mountain's going to come crushing down. They understood judgment. They understood the meaning of labor, hard work, severity. It wasn't an alien foreign thing. That's what they were surrounded. They were whipped there and so on. It was a different mindset. Now we're fast forwarding 40 years later. It's a sophisticated people. The men died out. Remember, that was a punishment. That generation of men, the women, most of them survived to go into the land of Israel. New children were born. New teenagers, young adults, men, women, and children that did not experience slavery. They were born in freedom. They were born in the desert. They were born with a cloud of glory over their heads, a silver spoon in their mouth, a pillar of fire at night, a well of Miriam, manna from heaven, Moses teaching, Aaron teaching, the Mishkan. They were born in a luxurious life of peace, of contentment, everything and anything they had. This now is a new generation ready to enter the land of Israel. It's a generation that's built on compassion and love. It's not a generation that is surviving slavery and beatings and whippings and deprivation. This generation required a new approach of talking. Talk to the rock, you'll get water. Remember what the Rebbe said, we discussed last week? Herman Wouk says to the Rebbe, how could you tell the young generation, young Americans what to do? The Rebbe said, not tell them what to do, explain them what to do. This is what it means. There, God says, Moshe, hit the rock. That type of rock, which is a rock through and through and through, to really get water, you got to work it out. You got to chisel, 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 chisel. To reform the mindset of slaves, you got to chisel away. You got to hit the rock to get the water. This generation doesn't need hitting. This generation doesn't need judgment. This generation needs explanation, commentary, words, compassion. Make me, don't break me. This is the new form of education. Our generation doesn't understand the generation that got patched by the Rebbe in Cheder, rapped on the knuckles by the teacher in ABC school, in the one-room schoolhouse. That's not this generation. This generation, you don't patch a kid. You explain them. You use multiple intelligence to educate. You do everything possible to get the child, to get the water out of the rock. But you never hit, because children don't, that's not how you educate. That's a last resort punishment. God forbid, if at all. Here you talk, you explain, you use different methods. My teacher said, when I got my degree in Jewish education, they said, use signs, use posters. We didn't have smart boards. Anything and anything, multiple intelligence to get through to your students. And if they're bored, one of my teachers told me, get up and change the subject. Never keep teaching a bored class. You'll not get through to them. Switch the topic. Tell them jokes, anything to keep them engaged. So God said to Moshe in a very subtle way, your approach is not the approach that is needed in the land of Israel. It's a new generation. You're not going into the land of Israel because your people are here in the desert. Your 600,000 flock that you took out are here and you remain with them. The captain stays with the ship. There's a parable in the Torah where a shepherd works for the king, and the shepherd comes back to the palace, and the king says, where are my flock? Where's my 600 sheep I entrusted you with? And the shepherd says, I lost them. They're gone. The king says, I cannot let you back into my palace. How does it look? The sheep are lost and the shepherd comes back. This is what happened. Moshe's generation died out in the desert. They were buried in the desert. Moshe remains with his people. It's painful, perhaps unfair, but the captain stays with the ship. And the Torah tells us, when will Moshe enter into the land of Israel? With his people, when Mashiach comes. They will rise up and Moshe will lead them then into Israel. So whether you look at it as a punishment, or perhaps I can't look at it as a punishment, perhaps it is the destiny of Moshe, who Moshe truly was, one with his people. He could not separate from his people. And maybe subconsciously, he hits the rock because he knows this. He knows that he has to stay in the desert. So he intentionally self-sabotages, because that's who Moshe is. I cannot go into the land of Israel when my people have died out in the desert. The earlier generation, the people I held, the people I coddled, the people I fought for, stayed here and I will stay with them. Now you know who Moshe truly was. So you could take the more, Torah has so many dig. You could dig. To me, this is the most powerful insight into Moshe. But you can choose to take any level that appeals to you. Some people like very much A equal B, B equals C. And some of us like the more psychological in depth of what really goes on in the universe. But I like to present both ways because people have different ways of what speaks to you may not speak to me. What speaks to me may. So this is the quintessential Moshe. Leader, fighter for his people to his own detriment. To his own detriment, sometimes you would say, but maybe not to his own detriment. Because to stay with your children, to stay with your flock is the ultimate gift. I cannot be separated from those that are part of me. Which now teaches us also what it is that we have to educate with compassion and love. This is the message. You're now in the land of Israel. Education begins and ends with love and compassion. So I want to wish everybody a good Shabbos, a wonderful week. And all brachas, Allah Selah, and the rackles, and it means metaphorically, when you meet a Jew, chisel away till you get the water out. When you meet a child that you're educating, chisel away till you get the water, but with love.
Is that where,
words.
is that where the whole concept of referring to Israelis as sabras? Hard on the
Yes,
outside, so
outside, now could be a cute little insight there. So ladies, a real pleasure and see you soon.
okay, thank you, Freida.
Thank
Pleasure.
you,
Good
Freida.
Good Shabbos.
Wonderful
Good
as always,
Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
eye-opening.